Welcome back, dreamers. Your host Ken here with some exciting news that I just couldn't wait to share. Somewhere in Dreamland now has an amazing new merch store filled with custom Somewhere in Dreamland hoodies, t-shirts, coffee mugs, pint glasses, and much, much more. So what are you waiting for? Why not hop on over to dreamlandpodcast.weebly.com and grab yourself or someone else some custom Dreamland gear now.
Danser avec moi. Cordonnier, tu fêtes, qu'est-ce que t'as-t-on dans la tête? C'est que moi.
Dreamers. Tonight, my guest is Anna Maria Manalo. Anna is the author of 2 books, Portals, A Lifetime of Paranormal Experiences, and The Way Through the Woods, A Child's Escape Through the Haunted Forests of World War II Germany. Along with this, Anna is an award-winning screenwriter, and she has traveled to over 27 countries, amassing witness encounters with the bizarre and the unknown. So without further ado, grab your blanket, turn down the lights, get comfy, and let's fade away into
Dreamland.
book. I'd really like to get it out there to my audience, and both of your books, and get you a little bit more exposure that way, because I think it's Portals is really a brilliant book so far.
Thank you. Oh, I appreciate that. My gosh. It's kind of like one of those things where you don't realize how much time you spend after you've written it, trying to get it out there. Like you said, it's kind of like one of those things, it goes up on Amazon only dependent on how many reviews you get. So when I first wrote that was way back in 2017. I mean, it has a long history. You probably gathered that from, all the accounts that I compiled together. And I mean, the stories you read Portal, and you probably read, I would say, in deeper depth, the first 24 chapters.
Yes. And
it's strange that you say that, because I was on, I'm trying to think if it was Lon Strickler's show. I was on a number of podcasts when the book first came out. So the issue with Portal that I saw in retrospect after I had written it is that I probably should have written a separate book dedicated to the Mothman-like creature that infested this one family. And at the time, my intention was I was trying to compile different accounts. But because I had so much detail on this particular family, I went on and on all the way to midway through the book before finally I, had to include all the other stories that I had compiled. In retrospect, that particular book probably could have been split in 2. In the second edition, I thought about it and then thought about it again, and I thought, okay, well, there isn't much more that I can add to it. I could put detail into it that I probably should have put in about how the other neighbors felt and what the other neighbors saw in the neighborhood. and even the antecedents before this family moved into that little hamlet that led to this. This was years in the making, this infestation. And it didn't just start with the woman's husband who killed himself when he was 24. It started way before that.
Right, right.
And I always said these portals happen. They open, they're there, but they open when there's some kind of emotional trauma. And in this case, the girl's father. The girl was actually my age, but the girl's father, so I was an infant also at the time, he had been seeing that creature way before he got married. And it was one of those things where it was just an occasional glimpse, from what I understand. It wasn't like something continuous. But as the years wore on, when his depression got deeper and deeper, and eventually he got married, it seemed like it was a time and place situation, because when he moved into that little hamlet, in that little apartment, it seemed like it was remote enough. It was so isolated. At the time, we're talking about the Philippines in the early 60s, late 50s. So you're not talking about the traffic that you would see today, the number of people that were there. This was a very quiet. It's not even a town. It's like a segment of a village. That's how small it was. It was only a few blocks in size, and then it had like a stream, or it seemed like a cross between a stream and a river in the back of the houses, and there were hardly any street lights at the time. And that's when things really took hold.
Do you think it was the lack of light, or was it just the perfect storm?
I think it was the perfect storm. I think that with his state of mind, with the depression that he had that had become very chronic, with the kind of circumstances where they were isolated from both families. This was a close-knit family. Both sides had large families. She was one of 6 children, and the gentleman was one of 11 children.
Wow.
And then suddenly they kind of cut themselves off, and they have this infant child. And that's when things really, really started to develop. And the infestation became every nightly. The gentleman claimed to his wife that he had seen it, and she kept denying having seen it. And then eventually she admitted to him that she had also had a sighting. And what's interesting is they had a servant who was very loyal. And he was just a young woman. It was a live-in maid. In the Philippines at the time, they had all kinds of live-in maids. She went into the child's bedroom. The child's bedroom was a nursery that was sandwiched between the father's little office where he wrote. He wrote books. And the couple's master bedroom on the other side. So the nursery was right in the middle, right across from, I believe, a bathroom, from what I understand. And there's a window, or a network of windows that stretched from one end of the apartment on the second floor, from his office on the left, going through the child's nursery and into the bedroom where the couple slept. So her mother walks in because she's crying. She runs up the steps, opens the door, and lo and behold, hanging from the window right outside was this creature. And when she explained it to me, it really, really, truly, Ken, reminded me, having seen it, the Mothman in Mothman Prophecies.
Wow.
And we're talking a wingspan of 6 feet, just like a bat with the talons, And then the face, there was a little bit of a departure. So I really don't know what we're dealing with. It looked like a cow with yellow eyes and large pupils, and it had in the back of it some semblance of horns.
Whoa.
And then it had like your classic goatee. And then it kind of like it shimmered, or it was not as well defined body-wise, but you could see that it was a bat that was kind of like just the wings all spread out from one end of the window to the other. And we're talking a window that stretched from the very top of the ceiling.
Let's talk about that for a minute. The shimmer, the not defined, that's something that's really pretty common in the paranormal field when people have sightings of things or even take pictures of them, that stuff is not in definition. It's almost like they're operating at a different vibrational level. What do you think about that?
Well, that's exactly what it is. They're actually coming through from a totally different dimension, breaking into ours. And I've always said this, we only see probably about 1/24th of reality. And as I'm saying this, I'm sitting here in a three-dimensional world. You're sitting there on your end in a three-dimensional world. Meanwhile, we've got 24 dimensions operating, and there could be like 10 million other things happening in the same time and place that you and I can't feel or not aware of until something happens, something that is driven by emotion, that is so intensely negative or even intensely positive. And then suddenly we get a glimpse of other realities because they break right through. Something summons them. Something makes them keenly interested, these other beings, that they actually come through and make an appearance. And Ken, in this particular case, I think it made a repeated appearance because the emotion of negativity that permeated the apartment was so strong.
Do you think that they feed off of that negative emotion, some of these creatures?
Oh, gosh, yeah. And they love fear. I do know that. They love fear. They don't like it when you fight against it or you've figured them out to the point that you're now emotionally detached because now you know them like the back of your hand. And I've been talking about this case for probably even before 2017 when I wrote the book. I've gotten to the point where I'm not really afraid of them anymore. They have no hold over me.
Yeah, you kind of feel like you know them now. You've researched them enough, right?
Yeah, and it has made me very spiritual because of that. And if people went on my Facebook page, they would see that I am very religious, not in the sense of being, sometimes people say, oh, she's so very religious. Does that mean she's rigid? Not in that sense, but more trying to align myself to be very close to God. Because when you have ancient spirits that are this powerful, you also need the other end of that. The very, very strong and more positive end that can defeat them. And that's what this whole thing has taught me. It has taught me that if you're going to write about this, if you're going to spend hours delving into this, you also need to align yourself to a very, very high spirit that can drown them out and overpower them. And, not to preach, but yeah, it would be the Godhead. It would be Christ. So when you look at traditional rites of exorcism, which I believe would have been appropriate in this particular couple's case, it's a shame because the culture was covering it up. I think that if it had been brought to the light of day, there would have been more help that would have been more appropriate because I don't know, Ken, that this thing is really just a Mothman.
Right.
Not from the way these people were telling me.
The way it was described is it's really scarier than the Mothman itself, if you ask me.
Yeah, and it followed them. It followed the mother and daughter to the grandmother's house.
So it was definitely attracted to them.
It was a haunting originally, I guess, of the gentleman. But once he passed away, it was almost like he was defeated. Then it gained power and strength because they were terrified. And it feeds on that. So it followed them.
Do you think, I've been working on this for a long time, and I've probably beat this to death on my show, but
okay.
I feel like experiences with the paranormal, whether it be UFOs, cryptids, demonic entities, anything that has to do paranormal, I believe that in most aspects, those are all spiritual events that happen for a spiritual reason. I believe that maybe spiritually you're vibrating at a different level. That's why you're able to see this, because there's so many cases where, Anna, if you and I are standing together and I see a UFO and you're standing right there and you don't see that UFO, which you know as well as I do, how many times that's happened? What's the reason behind that other than spiritual?
I think you're ready when you're ready. As they say, the teacher appears when the pupil is ready. And I think part of that is when someone does not believe or can't handle the information that is coming at them, they won't see anything.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think your mind is more powerful, and maybe they do see it, they just block it off, because your mind is very, very powerful and it can do things like that.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, Ken, because the other piece of this, and people have suggested this to me, has anyone ever thought that maybe this creature, or even the other creatures, are tulpas?
Yeah.
Being thought forms, driven by someone's intense emotion. And like you said, the mind is very powerful.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say, well, that's why whenever, that's why so much poltergeist activity happens around young women going through their hormonal changes, is because emotionally they're either drained or heightened, and these things seem to either attract or be put off by that person in that situation.
Yes. And I think that if there is an instance in the book, and it's later on, probably about 3/4 of the way through, and if I can recall correctly, I don't have a copy of the book with me right now. Funny, isn't it? I'm the author. I don't have a copy of the book. But it's called The Mound, MOUND. And Ken, if you got that far in the book, I think you probably recall what I'm talking about with the case of the woman.
Yes.
So this woman lives by herself. And the sad part about this is that she has everything. Materially, she has everything. A beautiful home, set near a river, in a nice little safe town. And, this story came to me by way of a brother who was very concerned and didn't know what to do. And in this case, I don't have a solution and didn't have a solution. And all I could do was basically say, you might want to just pray for her. But the woman was so lonely that she somehow invited, or perhaps even created, a creature that came out of her backyard. It was like at the edge of the water, this whatever this was, it was like a gnome's house, maybe. I don't know if you recall back in the day, they talk about dwarves and elves and gnomes that build these mounds of earth.
Yeah.
This is what this was. And he was near the edge of the water where the river was flowing. It's a pretty sizable river. If you think about Silver Bridge is what comes to mind once again with the Mothman movie.
Sure.
The house was sitting right at the edge of the river, and in between the river and the house in the backyard, this mound appeared. And no matter how much the brother destroyed it, it came back. Eventually, there was something that came out of it. It was animate. It was a featureless creature.
Wow.
Some people would probably call it a shadow being because it looks like a shadow. But it visited on her. She would see it. Eventually, it followed the brother. He went fishing with the other brother, and it followed them. So I don't know what that is to this day.
That is that's terrifying. First of all, it's terrifying because anybody that listens to my show knows that I am absolutely petrified of gnomes and things like that. I hate garden gnomes. I hate them all. I had a crazy experience with a garden gnome once, and I just ever since then, and this was as an adult, and ever since then, I want nothing to do with them. But I was going to ask you, had you ever heard of any stories of in your travels of the Fae or the wee folk? But looks like you answered that one, huh?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I would call that a gnome because it was the size of a human.
Oh.
When I think of a gnome, I think of something that's much shorter.
Yes.
Smaller in stature, if you know what I mean. This one, I have no idea, Ken, what it was that they experienced. I mean, we're talking about 3 different people that actually saw this creature, and it was standing by her front door at one point.
Wow.
And it was the height of a grown man. And speaking of gnomes and dwarfs, there is a story in the book about 2 dwarfs that interacted. I'm pretty sure I included that with this little girl after her father passed away. And she had a nanny in the room who walked in as she was talking, and the nanny thought, oh, it's imaginary friends. And once again, now these were wearing pointy, and I'm not kidding, they were wearing pointy hats. They were probably, from what I understand, anywhere from 8 to 9 inches tall. And they were at this deep window, kind of like a bay window. They were standing there counting what the little girl thought were plates, these round plates. And when she was asked, what do the plates look like? She said they were yellow.
Wow.
Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
They're coins.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't listen. I don't mess with the little people, man. I don't. They scare me. There's something about them. There's really something about them that's terrifying, and I didn't think that before, but I come from Irish heritage, so it's kind of in my heritage, you know what I mean, in my background, but I've never really liked gnomes and garden gnomes and things like that. I think they're creepy, and I'm gonna tell you my story now, and you can laugh at me, I don't care.
No, I won't laugh.
So when I was living in Ohio, we had a hot tub in the backyard and a pool and had a pretty nice setup, and I worked late one night and I came home and I said, yeah, what? I'm going to get in this hot tub. Now, my neighbor, we had a fenced-in yard, but it was chain link on that side. She had a barn out in the back of her yard, way out in the back of her yard. And it had one of those mercury vapor lights above it. And this was only about 3-4 years ago. Well, under that mercury vapor light on on the right-hand side, on the right-hand side of that barn was was more like a shed, was a garden gnome, like a regular-sized garden gnome. And I would look at this damn gnome every time I'd come outside because, I'd look at it like, I'm watching you, man. Don't do anything crazy. I don't like them. So it's about 1 a.m. I'm out in the hot tub. I poured a beer and I'm sitting out there. And when I got in the hot tub, I turned around and I looked at that gnome because I'm always watching that gnome. And, I looked at the gnome, took the cover off the hot tub, sat in there, sat in the hot tub, looked over at the gnome, put my head back for, 10, 15 minutes. Thought I heard this noise, this cracking noise. And it was real strange. It could have been anything because behind that shed and in our backyard is woods. So we have animals back there all the time. Well, I heard this cracking noise.
Setting.
Yeah, it was a strange, almost staticky cracking noise. It was real weird. And I looked up, and the first thing I did was look over at that gnome. And Anna, it was gone. Gone.
The gnome was gone. The statue was gone.
Yep, gone. Freaked me out. Listen, I did not even close the hot tub. I left my beer out there. I went directly in the house as fast as I could, and I locked the door. I was done.
Did you ever find it again?
It was back there the next day. Yep.
So it disappeared, but then when you came out in the sunlight the next day, it was back where it was.
It was there. My wife, she tried to tell me, she laughed at me, she likes to laugh at me, but I enjoy it because, she does make fun of me, but she says she probably, our neighbor probably took it in for the night. I said, nope, I know that I saw that. I make a point, Anna, to look at that gnome every time I come outside. That's how much I don't like garden gnomes. They really freak me out. It's like if you were to have a bedroom and there's a baby doll in the bedroom, the baby doll gave you weird vibes. Every time you walk into that bedroom, you're going to look at that baby doll, right? Make sure everything's hunky-dory with it. Same thing. Yeah, same thing with this gnome. I would stare at it like, if you move, you sucker, I've got you, But I'm telling you.
When you moved in the house, was it there already? I mean, how did it happen to be there?
That I don't know. I think she placed it out there at some point. It wasn't an old one. It wasn't, and she was meticulous about her yard. So if that thing even looked like it was getting weathered, she would have replaced it with a new one. You know what I mean? Meticulous.
Oh my gosh.
So, but I'm telling you what, first of all, I've never heard anything like that sound before. It was like do you know how after lightning cracks, you get that staticky noise?
Yeah.
It was like that, but it was like, there was a small crack in there too, a bunch of small cracks in there. And if it wasn't for that staticky noise, I would have thought that it was an animal walking through the woods. But the staticky noise is what brought my attention. It was the weirdest sound I've ever heard.
So, Ken, when you broke eye contact with this thing,
yeah,
then you looked and it was gone. Do you know where it was?
Nope.
I think it was right behind you.
Well, listen, I wasn't giving it a chance because I came out of that. I don't even think I hit the ground when I came out of that hot tub. That thing wasn't there. I jumped straight up and I floated into the door, Anna. I'm not kidding you. I floated into the door.
Oh my gosh.
My wife called me. She goes, you know what? She goes, you act like a tough guy all the time, but you're really the biggest baby I've ever met in my life. I say, hey, look, man, if that was a grown dude standing there, I would have fought him, but it's a garden gnome and it disappeared. I don't want nothing to do with that. You know what I mean? Well,
you would find this interesting. I don't want to vary from the topic, but I'm writing a book right now about antiques.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
I'm about a third of the way through, and I just, almost finished. The one account that was shared with me by one of the dealers, antique dealers, and this was something that was shared with me. I won't say the state, but I will say it's in New England. And the person who purchased it, the actual object actually came from a store in Poland.
Okay.
So the story goes, I'll put in a little teaser here because it's coming out in the spring.
Awesome.
The woman who told me this whole story, and they're still in business today, so I won't say her name or his name, her husband, who owns the store. They went there on one of their jaunts to look for antiques. They ended up in Krakow, which is a pretty sizable city in Poland. Very pretty, very musical, very cultural. And she wanders into a shop because she collects what they call a chinoiserie, which is a series of porcelains that are in blue and white. You've probably seen them. Like, most of them are ginger jars, and, people put them in the living room. They're really more decor. They really don't have much functionality these days. You don't really put ginger in the ginger jar. But some are vases, and you could carry flowers in them. She fell in love with this thing that was an urn. Mm. So she finds out from the guy who is at the store, and she doesn't know who they are. This is totally new to her, this particular store. It's not like one of the places that they visit with people that they know who are in the business. And the guy is Hungarian, and he tells her this is from, 1800s. And later on, she shows it to her husband, and he says, my gosh, it's pretty new to me. It looks new to me. It looks like it's in perfect condition. She really fell in love with it. She researched it a little bit when she got back to the hotel, found out it was from some Chinese dynasty. The next day she returns once again with her husband. To make a long story short, they get it shipped back to the U.S. And this is where the fun begins.
All right.
So they get it shipped, and it's sitting right outside. The UPS guy delivers it. They have a housekeeper who lives there. It's got it's a mansion. It's got 3 floors. And the housekeeper brings it in and plunks it into what they call the drawing room. So it's a pretty big house because they have a sitting room, drawing room, whatever. This room had a grand piano in it. And it was sitting right there when she got home. They're back from their travels now. They're both back in the U.S. She's all excited, but somehow she got a really bad vibe. And then the housekeeper starts telling her that their dog went berserk when they brought this huge box into the house. So she shrugs it off. She says, oh, no. She said, this dog is probably just not used to the scent of it because it just got shipped from Europe. Dogs are creatures of habit. They don't like things that are new. So, and she was also shocked because the dog is a breed where it rarely barks.
Right.
And it was going crazy. So it goes on. They go into the evening. She decides she's going to wait until after dinner to open the box. They go into the dining room. They're eating. And then finally they're done eating, and the maid then proceeds to have her own meal, and she sees the dog rush out the back door of the kitchen, come around and go into the French doors of the drawing room. and she thought she heard the dog ripping something. So she dashes out, following where the dog went, comes around, goes through the French door. She's back in the drawing room, and there is something ripping at the box, and it's not the dog.
Ooh. That is creepy. What was it?
I'll leave you hanging with that.
All right. I love it.
So anyway, yeah, so this next book has to do with the antiques and the things that inhabit them.
I love
We
it.
don't know anything about. What you mentioned with the gnome made me think of it, because if you didn't buy this thing new and it was sitting at the house, or somehow it was bought somewhere, you just never know what you're bringing in the house. When you go to a flea market, you go to these places where they're selling these items, you never know who owned it before and how much they're attached to it.
Very true. That is very true.
So your friendly gnome, I would suggest, I don't know, put it in the basement or put it in the shed.
Man, she could have done anything with that and I would have been happy, as long as it was out of my sight. I don't like those things. I really don't. I know it's a weird thing, but they really give me the creeps. Some people are afraid of clowns and baby dolls. Nah, it's garden gnomes. I don't like them. I don't know why. I'm a weirdo. I can't help it.
So maybe you had some kind of an experience with something similar like that, and somehow this conjured up memories.
Yeah, you really never know. I mean, it very possible. It really is. So, Anna, let me ask you this. How did you find your interest, your spark in this line of work with the crazy paranormal and the weirdness? How did you find your spark? What got your interest?
Well, I think, Ken, I mentioned before the neighborhood that I grew up in. It was a very, very pleasant neighborhood, I have to say. And it was very peaceful, very pleasant. But once the sun went down, there were just so many things that were happening. And we didn't know this. I didn't know it until I moved to the States. I moved to the States when I was a teenager. And I kept in touch with a lot of people, which is how I kept in touch with this young woman who was the centerpiece of the story. The neighborhood that I was in had people who were very close to each other. Later on, they unraveled the fact that right after World War II, someone had bought all these parcels of land that eventually had brand new homes built on. And those were the homes that we ended up living in.
Okay.
Now, when I say parcel of land right after World War II, these were open fields. There was nothing in them. But later on, even the backyard where I lived in, they found bones, human bones. So apparently it was a graveyard of sorts for dead Japanese soldiers and whatnot. Nobody knew that. Everybody just knew there were cheap tracts of land. People wanted to rebuild their lives. They were moving back to areas, after the war. There was a lot of damage from the war. So some people didn't want to live where they lived before because a lot of people had passed away there. So they moved to different areas. And then here we are. We have this neighborhood. And the house across the street apparently had a lot of tragedy. Nobody knew. They built the house. And then this same family that came from where that gentleman committed suicide after seeing that creature several times. It was an infestation that went for several months. The mother and daughter moved to join her parents, the girl's grandparents, on top of the creature following them, they also had all kinds of manifestations in that house because of the ground that the house was built on.
Wow.
So adding insult to, and you probably know this from reading the book, it was just like one thing after another, and then talking about like just putting them all together where you also have UFO sightings. The grandmother had a UFO sighting. She had burns on her face after she saw this object that was like right above the house.
It's crazy. Do you believe that all of this is connected somehow? If it's, let's say, UFO, cryptids, ghosts, anything, do you believe it's all connected as well?
Well, I think of it this way. I mean, obviously, no one really knows this, but you know how here we are, we're in the U.S., right above us is Canada, and right below is Mexico, and then you got Europe over the pond and all that. It's kind of similar, I think, with these multidimensional creatures. You know, there's your gnomes in Canada, and then in the U.S. you've got Mothman, and then somewhere they're all in the same dimension. It's just that they reside in different niches of those different dimensions. And then eventually, when your eyes are open, you know, us as people, when our eyes are ready to see them, if you see one, you're more likely to also see something else.
Very true.
You see UFO, and you've heard this. You probably have heard this. People who see UFOs when they're out in a national park, sometimes they also see Bigfoot.
Yep.
So
sometimes they see them together.
And receptive to, then you're also open and receptive to Bigfoot. Those elusive things that most of us don't see when you're ready to see them. You see them all.
Very true. Very true. I like that. So one thing I'm gathering from your stories, and I'm sure that you've put this together yourself because you're a very sharp lady.
I try.
You really are. So the things that I've gathered from some of your stories in your book and also from some of the stories that you've told me is it seems like one of the common themes and even a common theme with a lot of different paranormal activity is water, rivers, things like that. Why do you think that is?
You know, it's interesting that you say that because I never even really noticed that. But when I think about it, there are, you know, we've got the first instance where there was a river behind the couple's apartment. Then we have the flowing river where this woman was jogging, where she saw that creature.
Yep.
And then we have the river that is where that mound was located. And I can even tell you stories beyond that are not in the book about UFO sightings that happened over a body of water.
Yeah, even if you go to, let's say, the original Mothman story, the Mothman sightings that are happening now in Chicago, UFOs over Lake Erie that I'm familiar with up in Ohio, it's really insane. Oh, not to mention the Ohio River and all the weirdness that happens there.
Yeah.
It's really, I would like to, I think I'm going to research that myself and find how many different things I can and try to figure out why that is, because it seems like a common theme.
And you know, you latched onto something that is very universal, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. Okay. And when you think about the disappearances in national parks, there's also disappearances that can't be explained that involve a body of water.
Yep, and a lot of those people that are eventually found that disappear, like some of the people that are found in water. Literally, their bodies are found in water.
Yes.
It's really, there has to be something to it. I'm telling you, Anna, there's got to be something to it.
And you know, Ken, it's interesting because when I was still an investigator for MUFON, the department head, the head, at the time I think they were based in Colorado, flew out when we were filming episode number 2 of UFOs Over Earth. He's a wonderful gentleman. The first thing he asked me, before I ever met him, even on the phone when we were investigating a case, was, is it near water?
Yeah, there's something to it.
And I wondered what made him ask that. And then I was thinking to myself, are you talking about USOs? You know, the unidentified submersible.
Right.
Because there's also quite a few of that, you know, out in California, that strange looking shelf that's off of, I think it's off of the Catalina Islands.
It is.
So that's another instance. Or is there some kind of manifestation that's more likely to happen when you have all 4 of the elements present?
That's a good point.
You have the earth, you have water, you have air. The only thing you're missing really is fire. But are they the fire? Are they akin to fire? The properties of fire has energy. It's usually very warm or has radiation, so it lends warmth. I don't know. I could be stretching here.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, you know, is there something that makes them more likely to be attracted to manifesting in an area where you have 3 elements present and them completing it by being the 4th, being the fire?
That is interesting. That is a very interesting theory that I think is worth looking into.
And we'll write that book together.
Yeah, let's do it.
You know, it's interesting because when I go on these shows, you know, kind of like a light bulb kind of comes up. And suddenly you're putting 2 and 2 together that you never thought about before. And when you mentioned water, I thought, my gosh, I don't think anyone's ever really put that together until you mentioned it right now.
I feel special. I feel smart.
Because you know, you've seen all this stuff, you've heard all this stuff. And I when I think about all these different cases, even the case of the one, the ghost story in Nice, that's only about maybe 50 yards from the Mediterranean Sea.
Wow. Yeah, there's something there, Anna. There's something there worth looking into for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of water, my second book, there's scenes there that involve streams and rivers.
See, we got something here. We got some, Anna. We do.
Yeah.
That is no, it just sometimes when it's in your face or you're writing about it or you're researching it, sometimes all it takes is just someone from the outside looking in to see what is right in front of your face, because when you're in it, sometimes it's hard to see the whole picture. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, because you're too close to the situation.
Right.
And it's kind of like one of those things. You're in the woods, so you can't see what it really looks like. Someone has to be above it to be able to see it, which kind of reminds me of those crop circles. When you're in it, you don't see that there's a pattern.
Right.
So the question is, how did someone get all the way up there and create a pattern?
Yeah, crop circles are really, really interesting. Like, I really, do you know who Joshua Cutchin is?
I've heard of him.
Yeah, so he's another researcher that I've had on my show, and he's an author as well. And he's really put some very interesting, he thinks outside of the box, which is what I like about him. And it's almost in an artistic way. And, you know, he says he's put all these things together, and I've beat this to death on my show too, but it's our first time talking. So I'd like to tell you.
Okay.
So he puts all these interesting things together. He says, you know, like you have fairies 200-300 years ago, and they're doing the same things that aliens are doing today. They look a little different and they act a little different, but they're about the same size and they're doing all the same things. They're abducting kids. They're abducting people. If it was 200 years ago, a crop circle would be called a fairy ring, but now it's called a crop circle. You know, like really, really interesting things. Like the way that he thinks about these things is very outside of the box. And I think that he's got something there. Like, I really do. But crop circles are they're super interesting to me. They really are.
So when you think about the difference, and I forget the name of the investigator who's pretty astute about this. There's two kinds. The one that's made by man, and you can see when they bend it.
Yep.
The plant is broken. The real crop circles that can't be explained, they're all bent in the same fashion. They are all moving in one direction, but the plants are all alive. It's almost as if there was something metaphysical about it. And the other thing I thought of, you mentioned McCutcheon, is that perhaps they were created that way not by physical force, because that's what it looks like, right?
Right.
But I think it was by mental force.
You know, that's...
So you mentioned a few minutes ago how the mind is very powerful. I think these beings that have been visiting us through the millennia, and he's seeing the pattern that they've been here millennia, and doing the same thing, abducting, etc., etc.
Yep.
They're the same ones that are bending these crops the same way they make people perhaps disappear or become transported into their vehicles by the power of their own mind.
You know, this is what I say about theories, Anna, is that one is just as good as the next, because nobody really knows, you know, like, and I think that theories are, I love theories. I love hearing different theories about different things because it just keeps things alive for me, you know, like it keeps things exciting, because later on tonight when I'm sitting there in bed trying to read, I'll be thinking about what you just said and I'll deep think on it, you know, and I love that. Mm-hmm. Like, it excites me.
I just think that we are only touching the surface as far as our own abilities.
I agree.
And I think back on the Hindu religion and the concept of a third eye. In their concept, and I'm no expert, the third eye symbolizes the hidden powers that we have to be able to communicate without speaking, to be able to intuit, a knowing without experiencing. Kind of like all the what they call psychic abilities.
Yep.
Clairaudient, clairvoyant, precognition, all that is in the third eye. But I think on top of that, we also have the ability to manipulate the environment from a distance.
I think that's very true. And I think that really, I think scientifically we've kind of just brushed the surface of proving that we can do things like that with our mind, haven't we?
Yeah. Like when you think about, are you familiar with Ingo Swann?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Ingo Swann and I think Lynn Buchanan is still with us on the planet. They perfected the idea of being able to actually transport yourself to see something that's thousands of miles away.
Remote viewing, right?
Yeah. So that's the same faculty that you're tapping into. You don't have to be physically there to know what something looks like.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally think, and we only use just a small portion of our brain anyhow. And
yeah.
I think that the people that have the psychic powers and that are mediums and things like that, I really think that they are able to use just that little bit more of their brain. And I'll tell you, I'm going to go back to the spiritual thing on you, Anna. I think that once you figure out how to use your brain's full potential, I think that that's when you kind of ascend to a higher power at that point.
And I think that's when you become more sensitive to the ones that we can't see right now.
I do too. And I think sometimes all it takes, like, kind of like some of the stories in your book, I think that sometimes all it takes is a little bit of trauma in someone's life to maybe open that. Because think about it, when something terrible happens to you, or whenever you've got something, like even when I'm running, okay, I used to be a fighter, I used to be a boxer. So whenever I was training for a fight, I'd take my mind somewhere else, and that way the pain and everything else, I wasn't even thinking about it. I think the same thing applies to people that have some sort of trauma in their life. During that trauma, they take their brain or they take themselves out of the situation into a different plane, maybe. And that could possibly be what opens them up. Only they don't know that. So sometimes they're inviting things in that also sees that as a door, and that gets them in trouble sometimes.
Yeah. And I think the part here that really is interesting to me is that at some point you're going to have a greater number of the population becoming more and more sentient.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because that's the real true progress that's needed for the human being. It's not about, how successful you are, how big your house is, what kind of car you drive. Those are just trappings that interrupt us from the real flow, so to speak. The real flow here is to flow in such a way that you're really using all your spiritual gifts. Let's put it that way.
I agree. You know what, Anna? We're getting deep here, and I love it. I really enjoy talking with you.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful. I think that, I digressed into something that's not really even in the book. But I think the point of the book here is to show people that you don't have to be extraordinary. You just have to be tuned in order to have these experiences. Not all the experiences led to positive things. It just made them more aware. And I think in some cases, I don't know if you recall the experience with a woman who saw the red orb where there's a creature that finally entered her house. And she was made aware of something that was wrong with her physically. Sometimes it means enlightenment. Sometimes it leads to a better understanding. And sometimes it's just basically a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this book is about. But the deeper truths that the book tries to, in some way, touch upon is that not everything you see and hear is all that. There's so much more. Like you said, there's so much more way beyond what we see and hear. And there are things that matter that maybe right now don't matter to us. But we all, at some point, do move in that direction, and eventually we do get there.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm really enjoying Portals. I'm finishing it up now. I don't even know how many I try not to look at the pages because then I freak out. So I know I'm getting towards the end though. So I'm really enjoying that. And the next thing I'm going to read is your newest book, which is The Way Through the Woods, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And what is that book about? Just so everybody can get a feel for what that's about.
Well, this is a departure from the anthology because whereas Portal was a collection of different stories that I collected through the years, this one was actually based on the life of a woman who I met actually around 2016, 2017. The year that Portal was first published in its first edition, someone had alerted me, after having, heard about stories that I was compiling and all these different things that were, going on in different podcasts. They said, you should probably talk to this woman because she has a story that's so incredible. You probably want to write a book about her. So a few months have gone by before I finally did meet her. And it happened to be, it was a big birthday party affair. I was one of the people who was invited, and she happened to be there. And of course, they always say nothing is incidental, nothing is coincidental. Everything has a purpose. All circumstances converge, for you to gain something or for people to get together for a reason. She ended up sitting right next to me in a table for 10 people.
Oh, wow.
The whole restaurant was closed. We were, given a seating arrangement. She sat right next to me. And so that's where the story begins. I got to know her in the course of the evening. At the time, she was about maybe 85, 86 years old. She's 90 years old today. And she couldn't stop talking. Eventually, we had to leave. We exchanged phone numbers, and I contacted her a few weeks later. She agreed to meet with me, and it led to a series of different meetings. And before you know it, I definitely had a person who was sharing an account that was so profound that stretched through years. I devoted an entire nonfiction novel to it. So that's what this second book is about. It's about a woman where the story begins when she was about 6, going through the Nazi regime, what it felt like to be a German girl, and being recruited to become part of the Hitler Youth Corps. To capsulize it, she became a model teacher for the Hitler Youth Corps at the age of 14. Even though deep in her heart, she was only doing that in order to survive. Her father was a respected tailor. Her mother was a respected embroiderer. They were in the shadow of the Reich, the Third Reich, and they didn't want to upset the apple cart. But lo, came their way was a child who was her age at the time when they met, when they were 6 years old. The girl was like her sister. And she didn't understand why the sister had to hide when the German soldiers came to pay a visit. And eventually that was revealed, and that's where the story starts to really move and go forward with what happened to the entire family. Now, this is a paranormal story because what you need to know is what happens to her when she decides to escape And in order to escape detection, you had to go into the Bavarian forest. And that's when she started encountering some really terrifying and uncanny things.
Wow, this sounds like super epic. I'm excited to read this one.
And I will tell you, you want to sit down when you get to the point where she enters the forest. Because on the other end of Germany, way down up north, where her father was exiled, he also escaped and was making his way down south to where he thought she was. So they're both entering a vast area of wildness to remain undetected, because they were in effect defecting from their positions. She is a 14-year-old, and the other one as a tailor. He was a very highly respected tailor for the Nazis. He was making uniforms. He was ensconced in an army installation. But they exiled him after what they discovered about what the family was doing. So...
Wow. This sounds great. When is the movie coming out? Because it sounds like a movie.
Well, when I was in my salad days, I actually was a scriptwriter. So I used a lot of my skills it's new currency for me. Writing books is new currency for me. So I actually have to think, okay, now we're doing 300 pages. We're not doing 110 pages.
It's a little bit different.
110 pages is your maximum number on the screen, although some movies go past that. So now I'm developing the person. I'm actually thinking about what they would do, now knowing the character. And I am able to now do an exposition on the details about their lives, which I couldn't do as a scriptwriter. But it helped me to move the story forward, because when you're writing a screenplay, the audience is going to fall asleep.
You're right.
If you write a lot of text, which is what you're doing in a book, but, in the book, I streamline a lot of the action, and I think that's why it flows so fluidly. There's a lot of scenes that are just very, very suspenseful, very anxiety-provoking, but I do have to tell you that it is not for children to read. It is an adult book, because it does get graphic. There are some scenes there that are just incredibly shocking, because she's telling me what happened and what her father saw and what she saw. So it's not for, as they say, it's not for the faint of heart. Because it pretty much walks you through it.
This sounds great. I cannot wait to read this book now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope you enjoy it when you do.
I'll let you know. I'm sure that I will, because this sounds super, super interesting. I think, you know what? You may have a movie here. This sounds like a movie.
I hope so.
Yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I could see it in my head. When she was sitting with me and telling me the story, I kept thinking to myself, my gosh, I can't believe this is real. And I don't think it's ever been seen before. I don't think anyone has ever encountered anything of this nature before.
Oh, I cannot wait to read this. And after I read it, I'm going to have you back on, and we can talk about it and what's coming up next here. Because you got a book coming up here, you said in spring, so maybe by then we'll get back together and talk about this book, and we'll get a little bit closer to that other one then.
Okay, sounds like a plan. I'll be very glad to come back.
Awesome, I appreciate it. Well, hey Anna, where can everybody find your books and everything else?
Well, my book can be found on Amazon. It's available as Kindle and also as paperback. The second book is the same. Actually, if you just type my name, both books will pop up. Anna Maria Manalo, Manalo. I can also be found on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram.
And you are very responsive on Facebook. You got right back to me. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm
for me on the show.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I really had a great time talking with you. I'm going to include all the links to your books and everything else in the show notes so that everybody will have it right there. And then on my website, I'll also put a link on there as well.
Perfect.
Anna, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you, Ken.
Well, that about does it for Dreamland Tonight, dreamers. Thanks again for listening, and good night.